My wife cheated on me with her boss, and now she's trying to claim half our $600, $0 house and all our savings. She's even hired a lawyer, but I just found out she's been secretly laundering money through her sister's business for years. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing this story about how everything I believed in turned out to be a complete lie. It all started with little things, small signs that I brushed off because I wanted to believe in the best. My wife Lisa had always been a bit bitchy sometimes, but I figured that was just her personality. She's the kind of woman who can be charming when she wants to be, but also cold as ice when she's annoyed. Still, she was beautiful, successful, and seemed happy. We had a $600, $0 house, a good life, and savings that we'd built up over the years. I thought we had it all figured out. But then the cracks started showing. At first, it was just her being more secretive about her phone, hiding her texts. She'd get defensive when I asked who she was talking to, say it was just work or her sister or some friend. I didn't think much of it, maybe she just needed privacy. But then I noticed her working late more often, coming home with a strange smell on her and being oddly tense whenever I brought up her day. I'd catch her sneaking around, deleting messages, or rushing to hide her phone when I entered the room. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. One night, I decided to do a little digging. I'd always been cautious about privacy, but I was desperate for answers. I checked her email, her bank accounts, and her social media. That's when I found it, an email chain with her boss, Mark. It was explicit, full of flirtatious messages, plans to meet up, and even talk about keeping it secret from her husband. My stomach dropped. I never thought Lisa could cheat, especially not with someone like Mark, who's a slick, manipulative guy. She always claimed he was just a boss, that she hated his guts, that she was only doing her job. But the emails told a different story. That wasn't all. I found receipts for hotels, dinners, and even plane tickets. She'd been sneaking off to meet him, sometimes twice a week, for months. I was stunned. How could she lie so easily? How could she betray everything we had built? I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and confusion. I never suspected she'd cheat on me with her boss, someone who's practically her superior at work. It felt like a punch to the gut every time I thought about her lying to my face, pretending everything was fine while she was out screwing around. I was furious, but I also felt betrayed in a way I couldn't explain. I thought I knew her. I thought I was her safe harbor. Turns out I was just another guy in her life that she could use to keep up appearances. I started to wonder about all the money we had. Was she hiding something there too? My mind raced. I remembered how she'd always been secretive about our finances, especially the savings. I had no idea she was laundering money through her sister's business for years, as I later found out. That was a whole other level of betrayal I wasn't prepared for. That night, I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sat her down, showed her the emails, the receipts, everything I'd uncovered. Her reaction was a classic lie. She looked me dead in the eyes and said I was crazy, that I was paranoid, that her boss was just a bad influence, and that I was overreacting. She called me jealous, insecure, and said I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But I knew better. I saw the way she avoided my gaze, the way her hands trembled when she lied. I could tell she was lying, but I was too stunned to say anything at first. The worst part was watching her try to manipulate me, spin her stories, and deny everything. She even accused me of cheating, claiming I'd been distant lately and that I was probably the one messing around. That hurt more than anything, her turning the tables, accusing me of something I never did. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My trust was shattered. I didn't know who she was anymore, and I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. That night, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd just learned. I felt a deep, gnawing emptiness inside. How could she do this? How could she lie, cheat, and then try to gaslight me into doubting myself? I thought about the house, the savings, everything we'd worked for. Was she planning to take it all? I knew she was already talking to lawyers about splitting the house and our money, but I had a feeling that was just the surface. There was more, something darker. She'd been laundering money through her sister's business. I found out later, and I had no idea how much of our life savings was intertwined in her illegal schemes. That revelation changed everything. I realized I was dealing with someone who'd been hiding a lot more than just an affair. It was a mess I didn't know if I could untangle, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let her walk away with half our house and all our savings while she kept lying and cheating. I had to figure out my next move, and fast, because at this point I didn't trust her not to take everything and run. The betrayal was deep, but my mind was already racing toward revenge, justice, and maybe even redemption. The morning after I confronted Lisa, I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. My head was pounding and my stomach was in knots. I kept replaying everything: the lies, the emails, the way she had looked at me with that fake innocence while she was out screwing her boss. I couldn't believe I'd been blind for so long. It's like I was living in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next, but my mind kept circling back to the money, the house, and her betrayal. It all felt so overwhelming, like I was drowning. I decided I needed to get some facts straight, so I started digging into her financials. I had access to our joint accounts, but I wanted to know the full extent of her laundering scheme. Turns out I wasn't just paranoid. She'd been secretly funneling money through her sister's small business, a tiny storefront she'd claimed was just a hobby. But I found bank records, wire transfers, and receipts that showed hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through her sister's account over the last few years. I couldn't believe it. She'd been laundering cash, hiding it from me, probably to fund her lifestyle or hide her affair costs. I was furious and confused at the same time. How could someone I trusted so blindly be involved in illegal activity? And to think she'd even tried to convince me she was just a loyal wife, doing her best to keep everything normal. Normal. She was secretly laundering money, cheating on me, and lying about everything. I felt like I'd been living with a stranger. I decided I had to confront her again, but this time I'd come prepared with all the evidence. I wanted her to see that I wasn't going to be played for a fool anymore. That afternoon, I sat her down again, this time with printed bank statements, wire transfer records, and a detailed timeline of her illegal activities. Her face went pale when she saw the evidence. She started to stammer, trying to deny everything, but I cut her off. "Lisa, I know about the money laundering. I know about the affair. I know everything." Her eyes flicked around the room and she started to cry, but I was buying it. I told her I wasn't interested in her excuses anymore. I wanted the truth, no more lies. Her reaction was classic. She insisted she was innocent, that the money laundering was some kind of misunderstanding, that her sister was just helping her out. She said she'd never cheat on me, that Mark was just a work colleague, and that I was blowing everything out of proportion. She begged me to believe her, said she loved me, and that she'd never do anything to hurt our family. But I knew better. I could see her desperation, the way she was trying to manipulate the situation. I wasn't about to let her lie her way out this time. I felt a mix of anger and disgust. How could she lie so effortlessly? How could she betray me, cheat on me, and then try to spin it all as some kind of innocent mistake? I was hurt, but I also felt betrayed on a level I'd never experienced before. I realized I was dealing with someone who'd been living a double life, one full of lies, illegal schemes, and betrayal. The thought of losing everything, our house, our savings, our future, was almost too much to bear. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. Over the next few days, I started to plan my next move. I contacted a lawyer, not to threaten her, but to understand my rights. I wanted to know what I was up against if she pushed to claim half the house and our savings. I also hired a private investigator to dig into her activities further. I needed to be sure of everything before I made any decisions. I realized that this wasn't just about her cheating. It was about protecting what was mine and making sure she didn't walk away with everything while I was left holding the bag. Meanwhile, Lisa kept spinning her stories, trying to convince me she was innocent, that I was overreacting, that her affair was just a fling she was going to end soon. She even accused me of being paranoid, of spying on her because I didn't trust her. Honestly, I was furious. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. I couldn't believe I married someone who was capable of all this deception. It felt like my entire world was crumbling. I started to question everything: our marriage, my own judgment, whether I even knew who she really was. Every day brought new revelations and more evidence of her lies. I was walking through a storm, feeling betrayed, angry, and helpless. But I also knew I had to stay calm and think clearly. I couldn't afford to make rash decisions. I had to protect myself and what was legally mine, no matter how much it hurt. Deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The worst was yet to come, and I'd have to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. After I gathered all the evidence and decided to meet with my lawyer, I felt like I was finally starting to get a grip on the situation. Still, the anger simmered beneath the surface. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. How she managed to hide all of this for so long, lying about her job, her whereabouts, her business trips. Lisa always acted like she was the victim, playing the little wife who just wanted a peaceful life. Meanwhile, she'd been screwing her boss and laundering money through her sister's business. It was a sickening realization. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I didn't see the signs of her growing arrogance, her dismissive attitude when I'd ask about her day. I met with the lawyer, a guy named Mike, who listened carefully and then laid out our options. He explained that since the house was in both our names, she could claim half, especially if she hired a lawyer and fought for it. Same with our savings. She could argue we'd both contributed and she might have a case. But then he dropped a bombshell. He'd done some digging himself and found out that Lisa had been laundering money through her sister's business for years. Not just small amounts, but hundreds of thousands, maybe more. That was a game changer. It meant she could be facing serious legal trouble, not just a divorce. The realization hit me hard. It's one thing to be betrayed sexually, but to find out she'd been involved in criminal activity, something that could ruin her and possibly me, made me feel sick. I started to think about all the ways she had been manipulating her way through our lives. All those nights she claimed she was working late, she was actually meeting Mark or dealing with her. Shady schemes. I felt like I'd been living with a con artist, someone who used me and our marriage as a cover-up. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of clarity. I knew I had to be prepared for the worst. She was already talking to lawyers, planning her defense, maybe even thinking about how she could spin this to her advantage. I knew she'd try to claim she was innocent, that I was just insecure or jealous. But I had the evidence, and I knew she'd underestimate how far I was willing to go to protect myself. I decided I'd get a forensic accountant involved, someone who could trace the money, figure out exactly how much she'd stolen or laundered, and how it connected to her plans for the house and the savings. The next few days were a whirlwind. I started documenting everything: her bank accounts, her phone logs, her emails. I even installed a few discreet monitoring apps just to keep tabs on her. I wasn't about to let her manipulate her way out of this. Meanwhile, she kept up her act, crying, claiming she was innocent, saying she loved me and that she'd never hurt me. I saw through it. She was a master manipulator, and I knew she'd do whatever it took to save herself. But I was done playing her game. One night I caught her sneaking around again. I followed her to her sister's business where she was meeting with someone I didn't recognize. I parked nearby and watched. She was handing over a thick envelope, exchanging something with a man who looked like he knew what he was doing. I snapped some pictures. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively involved in illegal activities that could land her in prison. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Anger because she'd lied and betrayed me, and relief because now I had proof that she was dangerous. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to act fast. I called my lawyer again, showed him the pictures, and told him about the meeting. We agreed to serve her a formal notice of separation, and I started preparing for a possible court battle over the house and the money. I also contacted the authorities about her money laundering activities. It was a lot to process, but I knew I had to stay focused. Throughout all this chaos, Lisa kept spinning her stories, trying to convince me she was innocent, that I was overreacting. She'd cry, plead, even scream at me, claiming she was the victim. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. I'd seen too much. I knew the truth, and I knew I had to protect myself. I realized that this wasn't just about a cheating wife. It was about a woman who'd been living a double life, involved in crime, lying to everyone, including herself. I didn't know how it would all turn out, but I was determined to see it through. I owed myself that much, at least. I had to find a way to reclaim my life from someone who'd almost destroyed it. The days that followed felt like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was doing everything I could to gather proof, to build a case, and to protect what was left of my dignity. Every waking moment was consumed with worry, anger, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. Lisa's constant denials, her tears, her desperate attempts to manipulate. The truth, it was all starting to lose its effect on me. I saw through her now. She was a master at lying, but her lies were thin, fragile. I knew she was trying to spin her web tighter to convince the world and herself that she was innocent. One night, I finally decided I'd had enough of her false hope and her manipulative charm. I sat her down, looked her straight in the eyes, and told her I knew everything. I laid out the evidence I'd collected, her emails, the bank records, the meeting at her sister's business, the wire transfers. Her face drained of color. For a moment she just stared at me, silent, then launched into a barrage of lies. She insisted she was innocent, that she'd never been involved in laundering money, that her relationship with Mark was just a fling, and that I was just jealous and paranoid. I didn't buy it. I told her I had enough, that I wasn't going to be played anymore. I was done with her lies. I told her I was going to take everything, our house, our savings, and I was going to make sure she paid for what she did. I saw her eyes flicker with panic, her bitchy attitude replaced with desperation. She started crying, trying to manipulate me with tears and false remorse. She even said she'd end her relationship with Mark, that she'd leave her illegal activities behind, that she'd do anything to keep the marriage alive. But I knew better. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about her being a criminal, a liar, and someone who'd almost destroyed everything I'd built. I told her I'd be calling the authorities, that I'd be reporting her laundering money through her sister's business. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't just angry. I was determined to hold her accountable. She kept insisting she was innocent, that I was ruining her life, but I had all the proof I needed. I felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. I hired a forensic accountant to analyze her financials further. It was shocking how much money she'd moved without my knowledge. We discovered she'd stolen, laundered, and hidden hundreds of thousands, possibly over $1 million, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. The more I learned, the more I realized that Lisa had been living a double life, one full of lies, sex, and illegal schemes. It was hard to process, but I knew I had to stay strong. My priority now was to protect myself legally and financially. I started to prepare for the inevitable court battle. I'd filed for separation, and I was ready to fight her for the house and the savings. I also made arrangements with law enforcement. They took my evidence seriously. I knew they'd investigate her laundering activities. I even hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her since she was still sneaking around, trying to manipulate her way out of this mess. Every day, I felt like I was fighting for my life, for my future, against someone who'd betrayed everything I stood for. Lisa's reaction was predictable. She doubled down on her lies, claiming she was the victim, that I was forcing her into a corner, and that I was ruining her reputation. She even threatened to expose some of my secrets if I didn't back off. That was the moment I realized her desperation had no limits. She was cornered and she knew it. Her bitchy, manipulative facade was cracking. I didn't care. I was done playing her game. I was ready to go to war for what was rightfully mine. The biggest shock came when I learned she'd been secretly transferring money into her sister's account for years, hiding it from me. That was the final piece of the puzzle. She wasn't just cheating. I was dealing with a woman who'd been living a lie, involved in serious criminal activity. I understood then that I couldn't just divorce her and walk away. I had to make sure she paid for her actions. I had to protect myself from her lies, her manipulations, and her illegal schemes. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I knew I had to keep pushing forward. I couldn't let her destroy everything I'd worked for. This was just the beginning of a long battle, and I was determined to come out on top. I'd learned the hard way that betrayal comes in many forms: sex, lies, money, and that sometimes the people closest to you can turn out to be your worst enemies. But I also learned that you have to stand up for yourself, no matter how ugly the truth gets. The legal battle was in full swing now, and I could feel the pressure mounting every day. Lisa kept up her act, crying, pleading, trying to convince everyone that she was innocent. She hired her own lawyer, a slick guy named Todd, who tried to spin her version of events, claiming she was just a hardworking wife unfairly accused, that her affair was just a moment of weakness, and that her laundering was a misunderstanding. But I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I pushed forward, knowing that her lies wouldn't hold up in court. Meanwhile, I kept my eye on the bigger picture, protecting the house, my savings, and my reputation. I had my forensic accountant dig deeper into her finances, and what we found was staggering. She'd been funneling money through her sister's business for years, hiding millions in offshore accounts, and even using fake invoices to cover her tracks. It was clear she'd been planning to walk away with a significant chunk of our assets, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply she'd been involved in this criminal scheme. One day, I got a call from the authorities. They'd finished their initial investigation into her laundering activities. They confirmed she'd been transferring money illegally and that her sister's business was just a front to hide the cash. The police told me they were planning to arrest her soon. Hearing that was a shock, but also a relief. I knew this wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was about justice. I had to make sure she paid for what she'd done, not just to me, but to everyone she'd hurt along the way. I prepared my case for court, gathering every piece of evidence, every email, every financial record. I also made plans to fight for full custody of our kids, if she even wanted to keep them, because I didn't trust her anymore. I knew her manipulative, bitchy side would come out in court, so I hired a good lawyer who specialized in family law and financial crimes. I wanted to be ready for whatever she threw at me. The day of the court hearing was intense. Lisa showed up looking angry, defiant, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She tried to spin her story, claiming she was innocent, that I was just jealous and controlling. She even accused me of cheating on her, which was laughable at this point. I laid out all the evidence, her emails, the bank transfers, the police reports, and the judge listened carefully. It was clear she'd been living a lie, and the court wasn't buying her excuses. What shocked everyone most was when the judge ordered an immediate freeze on her assets. They realized how much money she'd laundered illegally, and they wanted to prevent her from transferring or hiding anymore. That was a huge blow to her plans. She looked furious, sputtering, but there was nothing she could do. The court also awarded me temporary sole custody of the kids, citing her involvement in illegal activities and her manipulative behavior. That was a huge relief. At least I'd have some stability, some peace for my children. In the aftermath, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. I'd finally taken control of the situation, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Lisa was facing serious criminal charges, and her reputation was in ruins. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, wondering how I'd let someone like her get so close. I also realized how naive I'd been, trusting blindly, ignoring the signs, thinking I was safe. Now I was more cautious, more guarded, but I also felt a sense of victory. I'd fought for my right to a life free of betrayal, lies, and crime. Looking back, I learned a lot from this nightmare. I learned that betrayal isn't always obvious. It sneaks up on you in small ways until it explodes. I learned that some people will lie, cheat, and manipulate until they're cornered, and that you have to be prepared to fight back hard. Most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself and your future is worth every ounce of effort. Because in the end, no matter how much you love someone, if they're capable of such deception, you can't just sit back and hope it all works out. Sometimes you have to take control, stand your ground, and do what's necessary to reclaim your life. And now I'm here, rebuilding everything from the ground up. It's not easy, but I know I'll come out stronger. I just wish I'd seen the signs earlier. Trust your instincts and never ignore the red flags, because when betrayal hits, it hits hard, and it can change everything in an instant. The aftermath has been a whirlwind of legal battles, emotional scars, and hard lessons. Lisa is now facing charges for the money laundering scheme, and I've managed to protect what's left of my assets, though the house, which was once our sanctuary, is now a battleground. I've moved out into a place where I can breathe again, away from the toxic shadows she left behind. The kids are with me most of the time now, and even though I try to keep things as normal as possible, I know the wounds run deep. Trust is shattered, and the betrayal runs like a scar across everything I thought I knew about her, about us, about life. Looking back, I realize I was naive to think I had all the answers, to believe that love and trust could somehow outweigh lies and deception. Lisa was manipulative, cunning, and deeply involved in illegal activities, things I never imagined I'd have to confront in my own marriage. It's humbling, honestly. I trusted her with everything, and she turned out to be someone I barely recognized. But I also learned something crucial: the importance of paying attention to the warning signs, no matter how small they seem. The secretive texts, the late nights, the unexplained withdrawals, they all added up. I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. The hardest part now is coming to terms with what's happened. I'm angry, yes, but also sad. Sad for the years lost, for the trust broken, for the future that I thought we had but was just a facade. I've had to forgive myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for being blindsided by her charm and bitchy attitude. But I also know that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what she did. It's about letting go of the pain so I can move forward. I've started therapy, talking to someone who helps me process everything, and that's been a huge step. I don't want to carry this bitterness forever. Financially, I'm rebuilding piece by piece. The house is in limbo, and I'm working with lawyers to settle the legal mess. I've cut ties with her completely, both emotionally and financially. I've come to realize that the most important thing is my own stability and the safety of my children. We're starting fresh, and I refuse to let her chaos define us. I've also become more cautious, more aware that sometimes the person you love the most can turn out to be your biggest betrayal. As I sit here reflecting, I can't help but feel a strange sense of relief mixed with regret. Relief because I finally took control, stood up for myself, and fought back against her lies and illegal schemes. Regret because I wish I'd seen it all sooner, that I'd been more attentive, more skeptical. But you live, you learn, and I'm definitely learning now. I've become a stronger, wiser man, one who understands that love isn't enough if it's built on lies and deception. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, here's my advice: trust yourself. Don't ignore those small red flags, no matter how insignificant they seem. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Protect your heart, your money, and your future, because betrayal can come from the people you least expect, and it can destroy everything if you're not careful. But also remember, no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way out. You just have to find the strength to take it. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I do know I'm done with the lies. I'm rebuilding my life, piece by piece, with honesty, integrity, and hope. And that's enough to get me through. The scars will fade, and someday I'll look back at this nightmare and see it as a lesson, one that made me realize my worth, my strength, and the importance of never settling for less than the truth.